Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to our Hospitality Law virtual seminar. Today's topic is Contract Food Service Management. It's produced by HospitalityLawyer.com. Today is November 15th, 2022. It's 11 a.m. Central Time. I'd like to remind everyone about our four virtual seminar series that we have planned for 2023. Legal challenges in the quick service, fast casual restaurant industries, labor and employment challenges in the hotel and restaurant industries, risk management and loss prevention in the hotel and restaurant industries, and legal challenges again at the end of the year in the contract food service management industry. We're also working diligently to plan our face-to-face conferences. I know people are tired of the Zoom room. We appreciate you joining us today. So we did host two in-person conferences this year in Houston and in DC, and we'll do it again next year. The Hospitality Law Conference Houston with the world champion Houston Astros at the center of our program will be in Houston. We don't have the date pinned down. A lot of activities you might imagine with the Astros right now, but we hope to finalize those dates, most likely the third week of May. And of course, we'll take in a game there. And then we'll also be hosting once again the Hospitality Law Conference in Washington, DC, Wednesday, October 18th at the Army Navy Country Club in Arlington, Virginia. And hey, if you haven't been over to that club, I promise the content of the conference, the speakers, they're all terrific, but that club adds a dimension you will just love. So I hope you can join us. So we'd like to give a special thank you to Gray Robinson and to Ethics Suite for supporting our program this morning. And let's get started. So our first topic today is key licensing considerations when a food and beverage management company changes. Presenting today is Grace Yang. We have Grace back as often as we can. She's a shareholder in Gray Robinson out of the Tampa, Florida office, but don't let that think that they only work out of Florida. Their practice is a national practice and actually some international work as well. But as you can see, Grace is a member of the regulated products section, serving clients in hospitality, alcohol, and food industry sectors. So think about hotels, restaurants, corporate offices, schools, universities, clubs, sporting venues, and theme parks. They cover all of that and more. Grace's clients include grocery stores, convenience stores, liquor stores, pharmacies, as well as all of the hospitality industries. And so we're always fortunate to have Grace. One thought about Gray Robinson and the team that Grace works with there, I have not met any organization that understands this space better than the team at Gray Robinson. And Grace is one of the leaders of that space. We're fortunate to have her. Please welcome Grace Yang.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Stephen, for the introduction and for having me back. And greetings to everybody out in webinar world. Glad to have you all join us. It's been my role in the past with my practice to represent operators when they are exiting a food and beverage management contract or they are entering into a food and beverage management service arrangement at a new location. These are often guided by management agreements, and these food and beverage management agreements are used when business owners want to hire a professional management company to operate their food and beverage services, because these professional food and beverage management companies have the expertise and the experience to try to manage these businesses well for their clients. Again, the clients can be either on-premise operations or off-premise operations. And sometimes they're a combination of both, where you might have on-premise consumption of food and beverages, including alcohol, and the takeaway and the off-premise consumption of the food and the beverages. So let's move on and talk some more about what we're going to be covering today. When you have food and beverage management companies changing, here are some of the key considerations that I want to highlight for everybody. First is, what is the term of the agreement? How much time are the parties going to be in an arrangement contractually? When is the start date? This is going to be really critical because the start date is going to be important to make sure that your licensing and your permits are in place and ready to go when your new team takes over as the new food and beverage management operator. That start date is also critical if you are a food and beverage management operator company and you're exiting the space. So that timing of when the teams change becomes very important when you are changing your arrangements. The second thing I'd like to talk about are financial arrangements. How are the parties going to be compensated? How are the costs going to be paid? So if you are a food and beverage management company, you are acting on behalf of your business owner. So how is your management company going to be compensated? Make sure your accounting and billing arrangements are well spelled out. And are you being paid a percentage management fee? Is it a flat fee? Are you going to have performance bonuses? And how are those performance bonuses calculated? I'll just make a quick comment that when COVID hit and the pandemic came, things were very, very much in flux for so many in the food and beverage space. Challenging pandemic for everybody, but my heart really goes out to everybody who is operating in the hospitality industry and in the food and beverage space. We had a lot of contracts and discussions going on about modifying terms and trying to make sure that both sides of the contract could be treated as fairly as possible in very, very challenging conditions. The third thing to talk about and really consider in your food and beverage management agreements are your scope of services. So, are you going to be providing the same type of services as the previous management company? Or is your company going to be taking over additional locations, additional food and beverage spaces, less food and beverage spaces? Maybe now, because of certain business climate and employment considerations, maybe you're not going to operate quite as many venues as the previous food and beverage operator. So really define well where your locations are going to be. What is your scope of service as far as venues, hours of operation, and other key deliverables that you might have to make in your contract. Those should all be well spelled out in your contractual arrangements. We'll talk on the next slide about some more key considerations. Let's talk about the status of these licenses and permits, okay? When you are preparing to take over a new location, be very clear and understand what is the current status of these licenses and permits. How many licenses and permits does the location currently have? What are the expiration dates? Especially when there's a time of transition and you have a management company changing at a location. This is a riskier time period when licenses and permits have to be very carefully watched to make sure that none of them unintentionally expire, okay? We cannot transfer an expired license. We cannot transfer a dead license. So make sure that the licenses and permits, you have a good inventory list of which licenses and permits are there and what those expiration dates are. Next, think about if those licenses and permits, are they transferable or do you need to apply new? So if you are the outgoing food and beverage operator, maybe you need to cooperate with the next management company coming in to transfer the existing license and permits out of your company's name and into the new company's name. Or is this the type of a license or permit where you are unable to transfer and the new company has to apply for brand new licenses? Especially bear in mind that if you are applying for new licenses as the incoming food and beverage operator, you need to backtrack and figure out your timeline for licensing. How far in advance do you need to try to hit critical deadlines to make sure that you're going to have the licenses and permits that you need in place when you take over operations? So make sure you have a good understanding. What are those requirements needed to gain approval for those licenses and permits? Do you need to pass health inspections? Do you need to have your incoming managers and other employees background checked, fingerprinted? Does your management company need to file with agencies and go through any public hearing process in a particular jurisdiction? This timeline and the requirements they are really going to vary. Your requirements are very much going to vary depending on which jurisdiction you're in. So take the time, invest, and really be careful about what your licensing and permitting deadlines are and what the critical path is to make sure you have the licenses and permits in place when you need them. On the labor and employment front, your managers and employees are going to be very, very critical to helping you succeed in your new food and beverage management arrangement. So make sure that your managers and your employees are kept well informed about what's happening, whether they're outgoing or if they are incoming. Again, if they need to be fingerprinted or background checked, if they need to provide proof of certification for food handling, if they need to provide certifications and proof that they have properly undergone a responsible alcohol server training program. These are all going to be very important. You'll hear from Stephen Barth later on in today's webinar, a more detailed discussion about dram shop liability. So on alcohol beverage service providers, some jurisdictions require and mandate that certain individuals in a food and beverage management business have properly trained servers for alcohol service. So some jurisdictions have it mandatory and it's required. Other jurisdictions make it voluntary. So make sure you understand what your certification requirements are. Even in those jurisdictions where responsible alcohol vendor training is considered voluntary, such as my home state of Florida, we always encourage our clients to go through the responsible alcohol server training program. It's a good investment in your business to try to limit your liability and risks in the event of an alcohol violation. But do make sure you understand whether it's voluntary or required and which individuals, managers, or employees need to go through that training. The final bullet point here is insurance and indemnification concerns. In a lot of jurisdictions, your food and beverage management company will need to have good property insurance coverage for a minimum coverage level, and oftentimes you may need to insure and indemnify your business property owner as well. So be careful, have those discussions with your insurance carriers to make sure you are carrying the right amount, the appropriate amount of general property liability insurance, as well as your liquor liability insurance if you are in a food and beverage management business where you are selling or serving alcohol. Next slide, please. let's talk about equipment. So when you are transitioning your food and beverage company, furniture, fixtures, equipment and inventory are big areas to review and to check on. What is the condition of the equipment that you are taking over in a kitchen space? Is that equipment in good working condition? Is it staying, or is some of that equipment leased, and is it going away when you are taking over that business? The condition of that kitchen equipment can really affect your transition period and, for example, your ability to properly pass a health inspection, a fire inspection, or another type of inspection that might be required in order to take over that space. Define and make sure you talk about the quantity of the equipment and the furniture. Is everything staying where it is when a food and beverage management company changes over? Or is some of that equipment going away with the exiting operator? Make sure that's well defined. Same thing about your quantity of inventory. Is the alcohol staying? What kind of food products are staying? Make sure that's all well defined and spelled out when you're transitioning at the business. You want to make sure that you are ready for those inspections. So sometimes when you are trying to change over a business, those inspections have to be passed and cleared before you enter that space. Other times, locations will give you a grace period and a period after you take over. Maybe it's 30 days after takeover date or 60 days after takeover date. Get your team as ready to go to make sure you can pass all the necessary inspections that you need when you are changing into that space. And then going forward, those maintenance issues. Are there maintenance contracts that you are taking over? If there are maintenance contracts that you are taking over, make sure you have good copies and an understanding of what those management contracts are for maintaining the equipment, for maintaining the pest control service, and other types of maintenance contracts that you might be assuming when you enter into that business. Next slide, please. What I want to emphasize is that one size does not fit all, unfortunately. There is going to be a really high variation based on the business location as far as your licensing and permitting requirements go. So that's why it's very important to take a look at what types of licenses and permits are already in an existing space when your management service provider is changing. Are there a number of different city licenses and permits? Are there county licenses and permits? Are there state permits? And in some cases, you might even have federal permits that you need to worry about. Do you need to clear certain items before you take over the space? How much lead time do you need? Okay. And then for those items and action items that can happen after you take over the space, make sure you're having very good follow through to cross off all of the critical items on your to-do list. Again, this period of transition when food and beverage management agreements are changing can be a risky time, and it's going to serve you well to make sure that you are carefully watching what you need to tackle before you take over as well as after you take over. Sometimes these licenses and permits will require a significant amount of lead time, perhaps more than you originally anticipated. So when you are transitioning, the more lead time you have, the better, because it will try to allow you sufficient time to address any unexpected issues head on if you need that extra time. Next. I wanted to see if there were any questions from the audience. At this time, I know that there are a number of you out there watching, and if you do have some questions you'd like to raise, I'm happy to answer them at this time. I'll also just say again that these food and beverage management contracts, they do have a lot of different terms that are critical for the overall business, but a lot of it can also be negotiated between the parties. So this is where I think communication and discussion, trying to set those expectations between the incoming management company and the business that's hiring you can be very, very important to make sure that expectations are met or exceeded on both sides. The more you know going into that space, as far as the previous management situation and what you're going to be entering into at the location, will be very helpful to try to help maximize that success for you at a location. So, Stephen.
That's terrific information. Thank you. And ladies and gentlemen, if you have a question, please submit it through the Q&A question. We'll be monitoring that. But Grace, while we're waiting for that, you know, when you were talking about all of the things in the agreement, you know, we do a lot at our conferences around hotel management contracts. And I was struck by the similarities of the things you were mentioning. And so a couple of things that popped into my mind that I want to ask you about. You know, in hotels today, the data, who owns the marketing contact list, it's become so crucial. Are you seeing that being fought over by the owners and the management companies in the agreements today? Or is that pretty well standardized now, who owns the data?
So I think a lot of times the business owners want to own the data.
Right.
Right. The business owners want to own the data. And sometimes it does create some tension between the business owners and the management companies, because the management companies, some of these are very large companies, and they have invested a lot of time, money, and energy in their own brand as well. They might have loyalty programs. They might have a lot of customer data in their own database. And so sometimes the management companies want to hang on to that data, but I know a lot of times the business owners want to own that data, and they want to know what is the databases and the technology and all the information that companies gather on us is truly astounding, I think, and that can be very valuable for marketing purposes. But I do know that the business owners are often trying to hang on to that information, even after a food and beverage operator may leave. But sometimes that needs to be addressed. Again, it can be addressed upfront in the contracts and addressed within the documents and discussed.
Yeah, we see a lot of fights over that these days. You know, 20 years ago, it just wasn't that valuable and that big a deal. But today, yeah, you're exactly right. It's becoming more and more of a tussle, and it can derail the deal sometimes. We found, yeah,
it can. So I think no two deals are alike, and right. What is considered very, very important to a particular owner or to a particular management company sometimes can be a deal breaker, and other times it's not necessarily a deal breaker. I think, again, that's where the setting those expectations and trying to figure out ahead of time what are our parameters for operating? What are our parameters? What type of expectations, performance-wise, financial-wise, right? And especially now, I think it's just still remains a very challenging business climate. It remains a very challenging business climate for owners as well as the management service providers. And you are seeing change at different venues. Sometimes it's the management agreement, and there might be a term in there about termination for cause or termination not for any good cause. There just might be an advance notice for termination. And where you can have success at one location, I think often depends on the way the business is managed. The way the business is managed by those individuals and where that local business climate is at any given moment. But the margins in the food side remain very slim.
Right.
Continue to see increase in food prices, which cause a variety of different challenges for the food and beverage operators. Alcohol margins are more generous, but even alcohol margins have been going up. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens as far as trend lines for the rest of 2022, as well as going into 2023.
Yeah, that's good insight. You know, you're so right. Costs going up, challenging finding employees. But that leads me to my next question, Grace, which is, again, back to hotel management contracts. They struggle to define who do the employees work for? Are they going to stay, right, when the management company leaves? And oftentimes the line employees, we can come to an agreement there, but oftentimes those key management employees, right, the ownership groups often wants them to stay, but those are people that have been developed and invested in by the management company. So are you seeing those conversations occurring in the food service management contract space as well?
Yes. So you're right that on the line cooks and the hourly employees, they will sometimes agree to carry over and move over with a new management company, but other times they might have a specific loyalty to their company. Maybe they've built up seniority and benefits with especially if it's a larger management company, and they may decide, I don't want to stay at the location, I'm going to move on. I think it's going to be a very individual situation, whether the employees are going to stay with the company, factoring in benefits, salary, seniority issues, and whether they're going to go. The key higher level managers often have to be approved by your business owner. And sometimes business owners will say, it's time for a change. The reason why I'm changing food and beverage management companies is because I'm not entirely happy with the top line management at this location of mine. So they may want to change. But again, a lot of times those top line managers, they've developed and invested a certain amount of time with a company, and they may wish to stay loyal to that company and move on. Other times, however, you may have managers that have become disillusioned with the company that they've been with. And maybe for personal reasons and reasons regarding what's going on with their company, they may say, this is a good time for me to make a change. I really like this location. I like what we've done at this location. I think I still have more to give, and I'm willing to stay and change companies. And they may be able to negotiate an appealing package in order to stay on with a new management company for the same owner. I think it's a very personal decision for a lot of people.
Yeah, and collective bargaining agreements, I'm sure, could impact all of that. So, right. But you said something very interesting, and I agree with you completely. You get these ownership groups, both on the hotel side and the contract food service side. They want to have a say in some of the key employees, right? The key executive positions. But then I think sometimes we forget that when you have a say in or veto power over these key positions, is that then opening the door to the argument that you had control in the operation of the business? And then does that open the door for a potential liability, right? To include the ownership group into the dram shop litigation or the food safety litigation, right? I think that's something everybody needs to be mindful of, because we're always walking a fine line on control and liability, and that key employee designation or veto, I think, might give some ammunition to a plaintiff's lawyer. Do you see it that way, or is that just me being professorial?
No, good points. Very good points. And again, that's why looking at insurance coverage and your indemnity provisions and really having those considerations about who your managers are, how your employees are trained at the location you are managing becomes so critical to try to manage those risks and to try to reduce the liability. It's very hard for the business owners and for the management companies. A lot of costs, a lot of expenses that you are thinking about every day. And where do you spend and invest those precious dollars in the business?
Yeah, very, very good point. Marilyn, let's go to the next slide so everybody can take a screenshot of Grace's contact information. Let's hold here for just a moment while we say thank you very much to Grace Yang with the Gray Robinson Group out of Tampa, Florida. Food and beverage gurus. Ladies and gentlemen, put them at the top of your list. Grace, thank you very much for taking time out of your day to join us and sharing your expertise with our audience.
You're very welcome. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you, Grace. Hope to see you again soon.